exposing some of the conflicts of interests in FINRA's hiring practices. Here's what you need to know. Julie Glynn, previously General Counsel at JP Morgan's Wealth Management Division, is one of two new FINRA hires for the brand new role of Senior Vice President of Enforcement. But her tenure coincided with a major compliance breakdown at JP Morgan, which raises eyebrows about her suitability. FINRA alleges that their mission is investor protection market integrity, but they have a habit of hiring talent from the firms they police. Oftentimes, this talent begins at FINRA, then leaves FINRA for one of the firms FINRA polices, but then returns back to FINRA. Would you imagine that any of these transitions involve a pay cut? Absolutely not. This kind of movement indicates that there's no loyalty to either side, but to whomever is willing to pay the highest salary. Just try to imagine a DEA agent going to work for a drug cartel, but then being recruited to come back to the DEA. This would be incredibly problematic. But it would be less problematic when you understand that the drug cartels fund the DEA by paying membership fees, and high-level cartel members sit on DEA boards and advisory groups while still operating illegal drug operations. A senior enforcement leader should exemplify a strong compliance track record. This incident casts doubt on the compliance culture during Glynn's time at JP Morgan. While she may not have directly caused the trade surveillance failures as General Counsel, she oversaw the division's legal compliance framework, but focused specifically on wealth management, potentially isolated from the issues at hand. Still, it's just a little hard to believe that FINRA couldn't find a more suitable candidate, preferably from a firm without a recent history of supervisory failures. The disclosure is the latest in JP Morgan's broker check report, dated May 23, 2024. The disclosure details a $200 million settlement between JP Morgan Securities LLC and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, CFTC, regarding deficiencies in JP Morgan's trade surveillance program. Combined with the $250 million fine from the Office of the Comptroller of Currency and the $98.2 million from the Federal Reserve, JP Morgan was fined over $500 million for these failures. Here's a breakdown of the key points. The CFTC found that from 2014 to 2023, JP Morgan's trade surveillance system had significant gaps, impacting multiple trading venues. This meant they weren't properly monitoring trades for potential manipulative or abusive activity. The gaps arose from various configuration issues, including failing to capture order and trade data from exchanges. This lack of surveillance potentially went unnoticed for years and could have hindered the detection of spoofing or other misconduct. Interestingly, JP Morgan settled spoofing and manipulation charges with the CFTC in 2020. However, at that time, they weren't aware of the surveillance gaps that should have been addressed during that time. For this 2024 disclosure, JP Morgan agreed to cease and desist from violating trade surveillance regulations. They were to pay a $200 million civil penalty, with potential reduction for settlements with other regulators. JP Morgan had to also appoint an independent consultant to review their trade surveillance practices and make recommendations for improvement. This settlement highlights the importance of proper trade surveillance for maintaining market integrity and preventing manipulative activity. But why is it that FINRA believes hiring from a firm with such a reputation is a good look for FINRA? Given FINRA's poor reputation of policing their member firms likely guilty of the same crimes, how does this fit into their strategy? Is it FINRA's plan to assemble a suicide squad of sorts? a group of criminally minded villains given one last shot at redemption. If you recall, it wasn't long ago that FINRA hired Feral Talib for the newly created role of Executive Vice President and Head of Surveillance and Market Intelligence. Feral Talib came from BNP Paribas, a company that had a working relationship with Ari Rubenstein and GTS Securities, and recently, a US judge allowed a lawsuit to proceed that accuses the bank of aiding genocide in Sudan. The lawsuit claims BNP Paribas violated US sanctions by providing financial services to the Sudanese government during a brutal conflict from 1997 to 2011. The lawsuit is filed by Sudanese refugees living in the US who come from regions targeted by the Sudanese government. They allege the bank's actions enabled atrocities like murder, sexual abuse, and torture. This isn't the first time BNP Paribas has been caught breaking sanctions. The bank previously admitted guilt and paid a fine of nearly $9 billion for processing transactions for sanctioned countries, including Sudan, Iran, and Cuba. Investigators found the bank used sneaky tactics to hide these transactions, such as removing identifying information and using other banks. Even worse, evidence suggests senior management at BNP Paribas knew about and approved these illegal activities. To understand how BNP Paribas carried out their scheme, you need only look into a once independent investment bank by the name of Exane. Exane was founded in 1990, quickly becoming known for their expertise in cash equities, derivatives, and structured products. They had a strong presence worldwide, including Paris, London, Frankfurt, Geneva, Madrid, Milan, Stockholm, New York, and San Francisco. In June of 2014, they agreed to a nearly $1 billion settlement with the United States Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control. According to the disclosure, Exane was involved in hiding transactions from sanctioned entities from banks in the United States. They were able to do so by using the BNP Paribas name or a secret code that made the payments appear as though they didn't involve these entities. If you were to look into the BNP Paribas broker check report for these disclosures, you won't find them. You'd have to be aware of their connection to Exane, and then you'd have to ignore that Exane's report appears to have zero disclosures. BNP Paribas notes on their website that after a successful 17-year partnership, Exane became a subsidiary of BNP Paribas in 2021. It's interesting that they consider more than $10 billion in fines across multiple agencies and criminal charges resulting in at least one felony as a successful partnership. But since they do, it makes you wonder how much money they actually made. Do you recognize the issue? If people like Glynn and Talib were leaving JP Morgan and BNP Paribas for FINRA because they had a problem with the criminal culture, they might also be compelled to encourage enforcement actions on their former employers. But they don't. Of the 97 disclosures in the BNP Paribas broker check report, not including the Exane report, a great deal of the disclosures came from FINRA. Since Feral Talib joined FINRA in January 2024, there has been no new BNP Paribas disclosures, despite their prominent disclosure history, with FINRA dating back from 2007 to 2022. It's curious that in the same month Talib's appointment was announced, South Korea levied significant fines against BNP Paribas for naked short selling. But this activity wouldn't have been under FINRA's jurisdiction. It's safe to say that Feral Talib didn't leave BNP Paribas because he had enough of the criminal culture and decided to turn the tables. As with most in this industry, it really comes down to who's going to pay the most for your services. FINRA benefits because they're recruiting talent that knows what to look for, because they potentially helped to hide it at their former firms. And the former firms benefit because the new FINRA hires bring with them a level of loyalty to their former firm that almost guarantees they aren't targeted for enforcement, which leaves the door open for that employee to return to their former firm or another for an even bigger payday. It's too soon to see if Glynn has made a difference in the amount of JP Morgan disclosures initiated by FINRA, but we can see that the oldest one initiated by FINRA is from 2007 and linked to Bear Stearns, which was acquired by JP Morgan in 2008. Coincidentally, this disclosure was all about proprietary short selling, where they were failing to locate securities that they claimed to have borrowed. This type of unchecked activity by Bear Stearns likely contributed to their downfall. What happened with Bear Stearns is a prime example of the government and the regulators showing us who they're really here to protect. While Americans faced financial turmoil as a result of the irresponsible risks taken on by Bear Stearns, the majority of those Bear Stearns employees were able to keep their jobs and their livelihoods once the acquisition was complete. To some degree, that same Bear Stearns culture permeated into JP Morgan, which combined with the shortcomings they were already known for, but due to their name and their size, they're just allowed to get away with having multiple felonies and billions of dollars in fines that pale in comparison to their illicit gains. Then, from the perspective of going from FINRA to work for a member firm, there's a great example that comes to mind that highlights a similar issue. Jessica Hopper spent 18 years at FINRA before she left in February of 2023. She eventually found herself working remotely for Edward Jones as general partner and head of regulatory strategy. In a broker-dealer Law Corner blog entry titled "SunTrust Settlement Proves that Jessica Hopper, FINRA's head of enforcement, would be a good umpire," the writer Alan Wolper points out that Hopper's consistency is what would make her a good umpire. In the same blog entry, the writer cites a FINRA podcast from 2020 featuring Hopper, the title, "FINRA Enforcement, Protecting Investors and Markets in Good Times and Bad." In the podcast, Jessica stated that her first priority is obtaining restitution for harmed customers. When a customer has been financially harmed through whatever misconduct we identify, we want to get the money back to them quickly. The writer went on to say, consistent with that, Hopper repeated the same sentiment at a SIFMA webcast that they attended. The writer then refers to a recent AWC at the time involving SunTrust Investment Services. From 2015 to 2018, they failed to establish, maintain and enforce a supervisory system, including written supervisory procedures that were reasonably designed to ensure compliance with FINRA Rule 2111 in relation to solicited sales of non-traditional exchange-traded funds. These supervisory failures resulted in losses during the relevant period of $584,466. Because SunTrust voluntarily paid back restitution to their clients, the resulting fine was only $50,000, which paled in comparison to the fines they were used to receiving. Another example that shows Hopper's focus has been on restitution for customers comes from a 2020 AWC for Stifel, Nicolaus and Company. A direct quote from a May 28, 2020 news release regarding this disclosure comes from Jessica Hopper. It reads, "Firms must have an adequate supervisory system in place to detect potentially unsuitable UIT rollovers and also provide customers with accurate information so they can make informed decisions about those rollover recommendations. We are pleased that customers will receive restitution for sales charges incurred as a result of the recommendations." The final example comes from June 2021, when FINRA fined Robinhood $70 million, $12.6 million of which was for restitution to customers. FINRA determined that Robinhood's communications with customers were frequently false and misleading, contradicting its mission to demystify finance. Key areas of deception included margin trading capabilities, account cash balances, buying power, options trading risks, and margin call notifications. Unfortunately, a Robinhood customer who had explicitly disabled margin trading tragically died by suicide in June 2020. A posthumous note revealed their confusion about how margin could have been used to purchase securities, as they were under the impression that margin was deactivated in their account. In the news release, Jessica Hopper had this to say: "This action sends a clear message. All FINRA member firms, regardless of their size or business model, must comply with the rules that govern the brokerage industry, rules which are designed to protect investors and the integrity of our markets. Compliance with these rules is not optional and cannot be sacrificed for the sake of innovation or a willingness to break things and fix them later," said Jessica Hopper. The record-breaking penalty and the restitution obligation imposed upon Robinhood further exemplified Hopper's commitment as FINRA's head of enforcement to prioritize making customers whole when harmed by unscrupulous behavior in the market. However, on December 5, 2022, it was made known to the SEC that an issue related to ticker symbols MMAT and MMTLP was beginning to hit the radar of multiple departments at FINRA, including their fraud department. As a result, Sam Draddy, FINRA's Senior Vice President, National Cause and Financial Crimes Detections Programs, Market Investigations Team, initiated a blue sheet investigation into both tickers, with an emphasis on fraud and/or manipulation on behalf of the issuers. Days before, on December 2nd to be exact, the SEC was in discussion with FINRA concerning a conversation with FINRA's OTC Corporate Actions team regarding the proposed spin-off of the aforementioned issuer, and tips that were received by both the SEC and FINRA. The oldest email in this thread dates back to November of 2021, shortly after MMTLP became tradable on the OTC and continued to trade in spite of protests from the issuer. Notably, Jessica Hopper's name doesn't appear in the thread, so there's uncertainty regarding when she became aware of the issue. One interesting detail about the December 5th email from Sam Draddy is that once his investigation was underway, he sought to compare notes with the SEC regarding their investigation to prevent duplicating efforts. The very next day, on December 6, 2022, FINRA published the first MMTLP corporate action to their daily list. At the very least, this should have been FINRA's way of saying that there was no fraud or manipulation on behalf of the issuers, because if there was a continued suspicion, FINRA's Rule 64-90 prevents them from publishing a corporate action. What we don't know is what the SEC communicated to FINRA, nor do we know the content of the letter sent to FINRA from Pete Sessions regarding the MMTLP corporate action. What we do know is that FINRA, for some reason, made changes to the initial MMTLP corporate action and forced the issuer to accept them. The most obvious change made by FINRA was that they included a December 13th share cancellation date, rather than the December 14th date shared publicly by the issuer. This change was obvious because neither Metamaterials nor NextBridge Hydrocarbons mentioned December 13th in their public disclosures. Also, when you read the December 6th corporate action, it states that shares of MMTLP had to be held on December the 14th to be entitled to the distribution, but the inclusion of the incorrect December 13th share cancellation date would have made this impossible. The DTCC requested a meeting with FINRA and representation from the issuer regarding the corporate action, but FINRA never showed. Instead, 2 days after the initial MMTLP corporate action, FINRA made a revision without input from the issuer, removing important information and keeping errors such as the incorrect December 13th effective date for the overall corporate action. The following morning, before the beginning of the December 9th trading day, FINRA's UPC Committee U3 halted trading in MMTLP. The UPC notice cited FINRA's authority to impose a halt, but the reason they provided was vague. If this wasn't enough, FINRA attempted to conflate their inclusion of a December 13th symbol deletion date, a role carried out by FINRA which served no purpose being included in the corporate action, with share cancellation, which FINRA neglected to include the correct December 14th date on both corporate actions, the UPC halt notice, and the link included on the UPC halt notice points to a version of a disclosure that was yet to include dates, even though a version that included dates has been publicly available since November 18th. On January 24, 2023, about 6 weeks after FINRA U3 halted MMTLP, FINRA announced that Jessica Hopper would be leaving FINRA as of February the 3rd, 10 days from the announcement. Hopper had this to say in the news release: "It has been the greatest privilege to lead this talented team of enforcement professionals and to work with so many outstanding and dedicated colleagues throughout FINRA over the years. Together, we have continually advanced FINRA's regulatory effectiveness and made a real difference in the financial lives of investors and the safety and soundness of the securities markets. I will always remain deeply humbled and grateful for that experience." The timing of Hopper's departure is curious given her penchant for getting restitution for investors. If Hopper was oblivious to MMTLP, the 6 weeks between the U3 halt and the news release announcing her departure would have been more than enough time to gain a proper understanding of what happened. How would you respond if, after devoting nearly 20 years of your life to a company, rising in the ranks to become head of enforcement and get investors their money back, you then find out that to properly do your job, you now have to turn on your company and undo not only your legacy, but the legacies of those that shared your genuine passion for investor protection and market integrity? So if you were in Hopper's position, you had 3 choices. 1. Be honest and expose the fact that FINRA was aware of a problem and purposely sabotaged the MMTLP corporate actions. 2. Go along with the cover-up, pretending that FINRA only discovered a settlement issue at the last moment. Or 3. Leave and pray that you're never questioned about the subject under oath. In my opinion, Hopper chose option 3. Then, on March 16th, 6 weeks after Hopper's departure, FINRA released their first FAQ for MMTLP. There were so many inconsistencies and outright lies that it would take far too long to explain them all. Miraculously, it was in this FAQ, 3 months after the U3 halt, that FINRA finally acknowledged that December 14th was the actual MMTLP share cancellation date. FINRA claimed that their inclusion of December 13th in the revised corporate action was meant to clarify FINRA's role of deleting the trading symbol, not cancelling the shares. But to believe this is to make the assumption that the reader of the corporate action had the misconception that share cancellation on the December 6th corporate action referred to FINRA's role. Whether the reader had that misconception or not, it wouldn't have made a difference. The real issue was always the inclusion of the incorrect December 13th date, which aligned with the incorrect 0-hour December 13th effective date and time on both corporate actions. FINRA just claimed that they were adding clarity by including their role to delete the trading symbol on December 13th, but if you observe similar exchange-type corporate actions on FINRA's daily list, FINRA never includes their role of deleting the trading symbol, nor do they ever bother specifying that it's the issuer's responsibility to cancel the shares. And to take it a step further, in FINRA's responses to lawsuits and to members of Congress, FINRA has stated that they were never a party to the MMTLP corporate action. This in itself contradicts FINRA's inclusion of FINRA's role to delete the MMTLP trading symbol. And if it was FINRA's aim to add clarity when they revised the corporate action, why didn't they include the correct December 14th share cancellation and effective dates? Why would they wait until 3 months after the U3 halt? If you recall the earlier Jessica Hopper quote from the Stifel, Nicholas & Company case, firms must have an adequate supervisory system in place to detect potentially unsuitable UIT rollovers and also provide customers with accurate information so they can make informed decisions about those rollover recommendations. The adequate supervisory system for a corporate action is FINRA's Rule 6490. An unsuitable UIT rollover by comparison would be a corporate action with inaccurate information. Investors made decisions concerning their investments based on the MMTLP corporate actions and how they were understood by experienced market participants. So when Jeff Mendel, the VP of the market where MMTLP traded, and the host of Trader TV Live, Brendan Wickens, both read the corporate action and repeatedly told thousands of viewers that MMTLP would trade until December 12th. And when brokerages like TD Ameritrade and Charles Schwab told their clients that MMTLP would be tradable until December 12th, it raises questions as to the adequacy of FINRA's adherence to their Rule 6490. FINRA claims that they discovered an issue related to settlement and clearance right before the December 9th trading day. Yet, the review process, according to Rule 6490, instructs FINRA to ensure there are no issues related to settlement and clearance before publishing the corporate action. So, when FINRA made their determination before the December 9th trading day, it wasn't based on surprise information. FINRA's U3 halt was the equivalent of a deficiency determination in accordance with Rule 6490, except when the deficiency is discovered as it should be. Before the corporate action is published, the issuer is given the opportunity to make corrections and/or appeal. FINRA's concern that investors might have purchased MMTLP after December 8th, unaware that the shares would be cancelled, and that they wouldn't be entitled to receive shares of NextBridge Hydrocarbons, were unfounded. Both MMTLP corporate actions indicated that shareholders needed to have their positions settled by December 12th, which meant that new purchases of MMTLP couldn't occur after December 8th because they wouldn't have settled in time. Both corporate actions further clarified this by including that purchases of MMTLP after December 8th wouldn't be entitled to the NextBridge distribution. The trading activity in MMTLP after December 8th was supposed to be limited to position close only. This is what multiple brokerages communicated to their clients in a variety of ways. Some brokerages made it clear that they had no intention of allowing MMTLP short positions to transfer to NextBridge Hydrocarbons. These brokerages informed clients that short positions in MMTLP needed to close by either December 9th or December 12th. The one thing we haven't seen, which invalidates FINRA's claim that they needed to U3 halt trading, is any brokerage informing clients that they would be able to open new positions in MMTLP after December 8th. This Jessica Hopper quote from the Robinhood press release illustrates what likely factored into Hopper's decision to leave FINRA. The fine imposed in this matter, the highest ever levied by FINRA, reflects the scope and seriousness of Robinhood's violations, including FINRA's finding that Robinhood communicated false and misleading information to millions of its customers. Not only did FINRA communicate false and misleading information to millions of investors and potential investors, FINRA has continued the trend in their FAQs, lawsuits, and responses to Congress. Jessica Hopper appears to be loyal to a version of FINRA that has done well by investors, and by excusing herself from the MMTLP situation, I believe she has hope they'll one day get back to their mission. The problem with this is there's more money in breaking the rules. If FINRA is recruiting talent from firms that have a history of breaking those rules, and also putting them in positions where they can decide which firms get investigated, then really there's no hope for FINRA as it's currently structured. At the end of 2019, Cameron Funkhouser, FINRA's Executive Vice President of Office of Fraud Detection and Market Intelligence, retired after 35 years. Funkhouser led FINRA's Office of Fraud Detection and Market Intelligence, including the Insider Trading and Fraud Surveillance Units, FINRA's Complaint Center, and FINRA's Whistleblower Program, since its creation. Funkhouser's departure coincided with Jessica Hopper's promotion to Head of Enforcement and the onset of the pandemic, which resulted in FINRA employees primarily working from home. This series of events created an unprecedented opportunity for nefarious activity, and as a member of FINRA's Market Surveillance Advisory Group, Ari Rubenstein of GTS Securities would have been aware of the opportunity, as well as embedded enough into FINRA to benefit from the relationships he would have developed since at least 2017. According to a disclosure from the New York Stock Exchange, Ari Rubenstein's GTS Securities was already engaged in a variety of manipulation on the NYSE at this time, so it would be hard to believe that GTS would be less inclined to engage in manipulation on the less regulated OTC, especially when the regulators had fewer tools and no longer had the expertise that came from Funkhouser's 35 years of experience. When Funkhouser retired, to the best of my knowledge, his position wasn't filled. The person that FINRA appears to have hired to be his replacement is Feral Talib from BNY Paribas, whom of course have been in partnership with GTS Securities for years. Christopher Kelly served as acting head of enforcement at FINRA when Jessica Hopper departed. Kelly and Hopper worked with Susan Schroeder, FINRA's head of enforcement before Hopper, so logically it appeared that Kelly was always next up. So it's again surprising that another head of enforcement decided to leave FINRA, this time on an even shorter notice. Bill St. Louis was of course given the position of head of enforcement while Kelly was still at FINRA, but I think it's obvious that he wasn't first choice. Now, for whatever reason, FINRA has created two senior vice president positions to work directly below St. Louis in what appears to be replacements for Hopper and Kelly.